Hello, my friend. Welcome to your sleep story. My name is Stephen Dalton. I'm an Irish storyteller, and it's my great privilege to be the voice that you listen to as you go to sleep tonight. Tonight I continue my boring series, not to be confused with my incredibly dull history series. In the boring series, we meet people who are incredibly boring. And tonight, actually because of a suggestion by one of you, we hear about the most boring dinner party in the world. This dinner party will be prepared by a boring man called Martin, who has 4 boring friends who come around for dinner. And one small thing, if you'd like to support my work, you can do so on Patreon. The link is below this video. Okay, let's do the relaxation session now, which will take a few minutes before tonight's sleep story. I'm going to count down from 10 to 1, and as I do, allow yourself to let go more and more. 10. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, or the floor, or whatever surface you lie on tonight. And beneath all of that, feel the support of the earth, that deep, grounding support, that constant support, that unchanging, reassuring support that comes from our home, the earth. And as you become aware of it, see if you can release a little more. Let go a little more. 9. Feel into your body now. Where are you still holding? Where do you feel tension? Perhaps you feel pain. Maybe it's in your toes or your feet. Maybe it's in your lower legs. Maybe your thighs or your belly. Maybe you're holding in your chest. Or maybe you're like me and you hold too much tension in your hands or your face. And as you lie here now, and as you become aware of this tension or holding on, notice the release that comes with awareness. Just let go now. 8. You are safe. Allow my voice to be a friend tonight, to be a gentle guide. Know that my voice will only ever take you to safe places. See if you can find the peace in that fact. See if you can find the trust. See if you can notice that when we feel safe, we can become curious, and we can feel a little light of joy within our hearts as we move closer and closer to sleep. 7. The day is done. Whatever has been, and whatever will be, will be. Whatever thoughts arrive with you tonight, just notice them for what they are. Thoughts, a part of being human, but not you. You are not your thoughts. You don't have to follow them. They don't have to lead your emotions. And so if and when they come, and they will, let them float away now, like leaves on a moonlit river, or clouds passing by through a starlit sky. 6. This is your moment. This is your time. Allow that fact to enable you to settle in now, to feel cozy now, to feel the warmth and joy of the ability to just lie here and hear a cozy story. 5. Peace lives within you. It is always there. It is just waiting to be found, waiting to be felt. And so see if you can find that peace within you tonight. 4. Perhaps allow a little gratitude now. Gratitude for the simple things. The shelter you have tonight. The breath in your body. 3. Begin to engage with your imagination now. Begin to see an incredibly boring looking house in a very boring street, and in the house a very boring dining table being set by a very boring man. 2. Checking in with your body one more time now. Your body has worked hard for you today. It's time to give it rest. And 1. Complete gently letting go now as I tell you tonight's sleep story. The invitations for the dinner party were sent 1 week before the date, at precisely 10:12 a.m. This was not an accident. It had been 10:12 for several years now. The host had chosen it after much quiet experimentation. Too early in the day, and an email might arrive while people were still doing morning things and get lost under more important messages. Too late, and there was a risk of it being mistaken for an afterthought. But 10:12 was steady. It was far enough past breakfast for the day to have found its rhythm, but still before lunch could distract the mind. He sent them by email now, though he still missed the old days of folded paper and envelopes. The email subject line was always the same: dinner, Thursday, 7. No exclamation marks. He had tried one once, but decided it sounded pushy. The body of the email contained exactly one sentence: I will be making dinner next Thursday at 7 p.m. No sign-off beyond his name. No emojis, no questions, no polite "hope you are wells." His thinking was simple. The fewer words used, the fewer that could be misunderstood. At 10:10 a.m. that morning, he opened the laptop. It was an older model that hummed faintly when awake, a sound he found reassuring. He logged in, opened his email, and began typing. The guest list never changed. Alan, Judith, Margaret, Peter, all in alphabetical order, so no one could suspect any preference. He typed slowly, using the same keys he always had for each letter, pausing after the subject line to check the spacing. Satisfied, he waited, eyes on the clock in the bottom right of the screen. When the minute hand reached 12, he pressed send. There was no satisfying click or whoosh, just the quiet appearance of the sent folder number increasing by 1. Some people might have gone on with their day at this point, but he stayed where he was for several minutes longer, watching the inbox, just in case someone replied instantly. No one did. No one ever did. The guests knew there was no need to reply. Their presence was already assumed. So, with the invitations dispatched, he eventually closed the laptop, smoothed the sleeve of his jumper, and felt the faint glow of having completed a task both necessary and utterly predictable. It was the first small step toward the dinner party. A week away, yes, but he liked to start early. From the moment the invitations left his outbox, the week leading to the dinner party settled into a sequence of small, measured preparations. There was no rush. There never was. The dinner party would be on Thursday. It was always on a Thursday, which meant there was a predictable rhythm to each preceding day. On Friday, he thought about the tablecloth, not the laying of it, just the thought. It was folded in the cupboard under the stairs, where it had been since the last dinner party, wrapped in a clear plastic cover that had yellowed faintly with age. He didn't take it out. There was no need yet. Instead, he pictured it in his mind. Off-white, with the permanent creases that years of careful folding had given it. He imagined placing it on the table, smoothing it with the flat of his palms. The image was enough for now. Saturday was for cutlery assessment. He opened the drawer, the one with the soft grey liner that had never once slipped out of place, and looked in at the forks, knives and spoons lying in their usual quiet rows. Each handle faced the same way. Each bowl and blade aligned like well-behaved soldiers. He lifted one fork, not to polish it, just to feel its weight in his hand. He held it for a few seconds, then returned it to its position. Satisfied, he closed the drawer gently. so the cutlery wouldn't shift. Sunday, the plates stored on the second shelf in the kitchen cupboard, stacked in order of their faintest to deepest scratch marks. He did not move them. He rarely moved things without purpose. He noticed one of them had a small chip near the edge, and he decided it would be his plate on Thursday. Ghosts, he believed, should always take the imperfect one. Monday was for the salt and pepper shakers. Tuesday was for glasses. And Wednesday, the day before, was for food. He wrote a list. Carrots, onions, potatoes, chicken, vanilla ice cream. There was no need to list quantities. He knew them by heart. At the shop, he selected each item with care, avoiding anything that looked too fresh or too wilted. Just the middle ground. The cashier asked if he needed a bag. He did, but he said no. The items fit neatly into the fabric tote he had brought from home, the one with no writing on it. By Wednesday evening, everything was in place. The tablecloth, waiting in its cupboard, the cutlery in its drawer, the plates in their stack, the glasses in their row, the groceries in their correct shelves. It was not exciting, but it was ready. The host's name, by the way, was Martin. Not Martin anything, just Martin. His surname existed, of course, but rarely came up, and when it did, it was usually misheard and politely ignored. He was a man of middle height, middle build, and middle expectations. His hair had been brown once, then grey, but now lived in the undisturbed zone between the two. He kept it at a length that was never quite short, never quite long, and always described by barbers as about the same again. Martin lived alone, though alone was not a word he would use. he would say, just me, as if other arrangements were still possible, just not currently in progress. His house had 2 bedrooms, one of which was called the spare room, despite having no particular history of guests. The spare room contained a single bed, a wardrobe that no one opened in years, and a chair that served mainly as a storage facility for shirts he wasn't sure about. He worked from home in a role that involved spreadsheets, emails, and the occasional phone call, all conducted at the same desk, in the same chair, which had developed a subtle lean to the left. If asked what he did, he would reply with a description of the work rather than the job title. This had the effect of making the listener feel as if they already knew and didn't need to ask again. Martin was a man of deep routines, but not the kind that drew attention to themselves. He ate breakfast at 7:34 a.m. every day, even on weekends. He wore the same style of jumper in 3 shades: navy, grey, and a green so faded it could be mistaken for the other 2. He disliked patterns, preferring things that were just one thing and nothing else. Even his tea was always made the same way. Tea bag in first, water poured to the halfway point, stir exactly 3 times, then top up, stir once more, remove bag, no milk. Hosting dinner parties had become part of his routine too, though hosting was perhaps too grand a word for what occurred. There were no themes, no centerpieces, no music, just the same 4 guests, the same 3 courses, and the same steady pace from arrival to departure. It was less a social event and more a shared confirmation that nothing much had changed since the last time, which for Martin was the highest form of success. Thursday began, as all Thursdays did for Martin, with the sound of the boiler clicking on at 6:48 a.m. He didn't need an alarm clock. the boiler was enough. The click was followed by the low, steady hum of water moving through pipes, a sound he found both unremarkable and slightly grounding. The day passed without event, and by 6:57 p.m. the dinner party was about to be in motion, though motion was not quite the right word. The guests arrived exactly as they always did, not together, but close enough in timing that the pauses between doorbell rings were shorter than the pauses in conversation later. Alan was first. He wore a jacket that had once been navy, but had settled over the years into a polite sort of grey. Underneath was a shirt with no pattern, no pocket, and no ambition beyond covering him. He stepped inside, removed his shoes without prompting, and placed them neatly beside the mat, so that the toes of each shoe were exactly aligned. Judith came next, carrying nothing. She never brought anything, not because she was impolite, but because it had never been established that she should. Her cardigan was buttoned all the way to the top, not tightly, but enough to suggest she had no plans to undo it until she got home. She greeted Martin with a nod that was neither warm nor cold, just the kind of nod given by someone who had nodded at the same person many times before. Margaret followed, holding a rolled-up magazine under her arm. It was Gardens Today, though she had no garden. The magazine was never discussed, and Martin had long since stopped wondering whether she brought it as reading material or as a sort of companion. Last was Peter, whose great claim to fame, if it could be called that, was the time he had nearly bought a very expensive kettle. He arrived with his hands in his pockets, looking faintly like he might have been on his way somewhere else, but decided against it. Once inside, the guests placed their coats over the hallway chair in the same order as last time. There was no discussion about the order. It simply happened. The dining room had been set for hours. 4 chairs, equally spaced, 4 glasses, aligned so the seams faced the same direction, 4 white plates, free of decoration. Soup was served in bowls that matched closely enough to avoid comment. It was vegetable, though not of the brightly colored kind. The vegetables had been cooked until they shared the same gentle shade of pale gold. Steam rose in thin, slow threads, the kind that drift sideways before disappearing. They ate in the familiar silence of people who had run out of small talk years ago and decided it wasn't worth replenishing. The first remark came from Alan. Rain was steady today. 3 small nods followed, like punctuation marks in a sentence that had no ending. Margaret took 2 crackers from the plate in the center. Judith took 1, but broke it in half before eating it. Peter took none, but looked at them briefly, perhaps considering, then not. The soup was finished almost simultaneously. Spoons placed gently on bowls. Martin collected them without fuss, stacking them in the kitchen with the soft clink of porcelain on porcelain. The sound carried into the dining room, where no one commented on it. When he returned, the main course was ready. Chicken, baked until it had the color of old paper, and potatoes arranged in small, tidy clusters. Each plate was served with exactly the same amount of food. Conversation hovered briefly over bin collection times before drifting into the equally safe waters of whether it might rain again tomorrow. It still was outside, raining, that is, and they spoke about that too. The chicken was eaten methodically, each bite cut into pieces of almost identical size. Alan had a way of placing his knife and fork down between mouthfuls that suggested a faint ceremony, though it was not intentional. Judith, by contrast, kept hers in her hands throughout, but paused occasionally to look at her plate, as though it might have changed since the last time she looked. Margaret ate the potatoes in pairs, always two together, never one or three. No one noticed except Martin, who had noticed every time she had done it over the past decade. Peter ate in the same order he always did: chicken, then potatoes, then whatever vegetable happened to be on offer. He didn't look at the others' plates, and they didn't look at his. The conversation thinned until it was barely there at all. There was a brief flicker when Alan mentioned he was considering having his milk delivered. Judith raised her eyebrows, not in surprise, but in mild acknowledgement. Margaret asked if it was because the walk was too far to the corner shop. Alan said he just didn't feel like walking, but it wasn't that long. No one added anything further. After that, the sounds of eating became the only conversation. Then Martin noticed how the lamplight fell on the surface of the chicken, making it appear slightly shinier on one side than the other. He wondered briefly if anyone else had noticed, then decided it didn't matter. At one point, Peter asked if anyone had been to the new supermarket. No one had. Judith thought she might go next week if she had time. Alan said he had heard they had wider aisles. Margaret said wider aisles could be good if you had a trolley. This prompted a short silence, while everyone considered the merits of wider aisles. When the plates were finally cleared, it was not with the flourish of a host moving the evening along, but with the quiet inevitability of someone turning a page in a book they had read many times before. No one thanked Martin yet. That would come later, at the door, and only in the standard phrasing. Dessert arrived in rectangular bowls, the kind designed to suggest modernity without committing to it. Each held 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream from the large tub in Martin's freezer. No more, no less. The scoops were not perfectly round, nor were they misshapen. They were simply scoops, the sort that looked exactly the same, whether you stared at them or didn't. The ice cream was the pale yellow of something that wanted to be called cream, but was happier just being cold. It softened almost immediately under the lamplight, forming a thin rim of liquid around each scoop. Alan began eating his from the edge inward, making slow circles that gave the appearance of method. Judith took hers in small, decisive spoonfuls, always cutting clean lines into the surface. Margaret let hers sit for a while, possibly to melt, possibly to avoid eating it too quickly. Peter began in the middle, digging straight down, as if testing the structural integrity. No one spoke for several minutes. The only sounds were the soft clink of spoons against ceramic and the rain falling outside. When the silence did break, it was Margaret saying, "It's not as cold as last time." Alan nodded. Judith said she hadn't noticed. Peter agreed with Margaret but didn't elaborate. The topic lingered for a few moments before gently collapsing under its own lack of urgency. By the time everyone's bowl was empty, the ice cream had surrendered entirely to its liquid state, leaving thin streaks that no one felt the need to scrape up. Martin collected the bowls and carried them to the kitchen. There was no coffee. There never was. Martin had stopped offering years ago, after realizing no one ever said yes. And even when they did, they only took one polite sip before leaving it behind. Instead, there was simply the moment after dessert, when everyone sat back in their chairs and looked, not at each other, but at the objects nearest to them. Alan stared at the salt shaker. Judith examined the stitching on the edge of her napkin. Margaret glanced toward the sideboard, as if she might recognize something on it. Peter studied his own hands with an expression that suggested they were performing to expectation. No one made a move to leave, but no one suggested staying longer either. The conversation that did appear came in the form of Judith saying, "That was nice." It was not clear whether she meant the ice cream, the dinner, or simply the fact that time had passed in an orderly fashion. Alan agreed with her, as did Peter, while Margaret gave a nod that might have been a yawn if it had lasted longer. Martin then cleared the table, and at 8:27 he reappeared in the doorway, his hands resting lightly on the frame. It was a non-verbal signal, the dinner party equivalent of dimming the lights in a theatre. The guests received it without fuss. Margaret rolled her magazine under her arm again. Alan glanced at the salt shaker one last time. Judith smoothed the front of her cardigan, and Peter checked his pockets for no clear reason. In the hallway, coats were retrieved from the chair in the exact reverse order they had been placed there. Shoes were either put on or not, depending on how people had arrived, with no comment either way. There were 4 goodbyes, each containing the same words. "Thanks for dinner," Martin replied to each in turn, with the same 2 words. "Of course." When the door closed behind the last guest, Martin stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the quiet, settling back into the house. The dining room was now empty, save for the tablecloth still spread across the table. He walked in and picked up the salt shaker and returned it to the windowsill, aligning its base with the faint ring it had made over the years. The dinner party was over. It had gone exactly as it always did. Steadily, politely, and without surprise. Martin turned off the dining room light, leaving the table in the soft shadow of the hallway lamp. In the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed quietly, taking its time. He filled the kettle halfway. Outside, the street was empty, and the rain was falling. Nothing had changed, and for Martin, that was the most satisfying part.